The Russians are attempting to enter Chernihiv the next day, February the 26th. They are now attacking through the village of Tovstolis, breaking through the Ukrainian checkpoint. Russian armored vehicles, tanks and BMPs are moving into the outskirts of Chernihiv, here in the area of Epicenter hypermarket, and even parked near one of the high-rise buildings. Leading the formations is Leonid Shchyotkin. This breakthrough will be the greatest success of the Russian army in Chernihiv. If success is what you call a burnt Russian tank, a captured Russian commander, and Russian armored vehicles captured as trophies. On the morning of February 26th, Konstantin Haltev's unit held a defense in the area of Kildzva Street.
We went to look and reconnoiter the situation. We literally got here and saw two tanks that jumped here along the far side of this green building.
The tank, in which was the Russian commander Leonid Shchyotkin, manages to shoot at a high-rise building and then drives out onto the Kildzva Street. On the outskirts of the city, enemy tanks are met by the soldiers of the armed forces, who are not yet morally ready for such battles.
On February 24th, when I gave the order to drive the tanks into the yards, the soldiers looked at me wide-eyed and said, "But these are people's fences. This is our Ukrainian culture. The mentality that does not allow us to somehow drive our equipment into someone else's yard to break something."
Shchyotkin's tank headed for the Pivtsi airfield. After driving 100 meters along Kildzva Street, he was ambushed by fighters of the 1st Tank Brigade. Here they are, Artur Olferenko and Maxim Borisenko. We wanted to talk with them in more detail about the circumstances of the battle, but the guys have been fighting in the hottest areas of the front for several months now. This attempt to speak to them came at a time of relative quiet on the front line, when I was preparing this material about the defense of Chernihiv. So let's listen to what they told our colleague from the 1+1 channel.
There were 7 tanks and 7 infantry fighting vehicles with infantry. The second most powerful army of the world, yet advancing just like in World War II. The main thing was that the battalion commander, or whoever was in charge, rides at the head of the convoy. And our task was not to let this enemy pass deep into Chernihiv. We hid behind the fence and waited for this enemy. We used live bait, so to speak.
They first shot his caterpillar tread, while the shot of the Russian tank missed its target. Because the caterpillar tread flew off, the tank began to spin, turn sideways. He was turned sideways, so his second shot hit the engine and fuel tanks.
Mechanic Dmytro Opoykov dies in a Russian tank, while injured Shchyotkin and gunner Mikhail Kulikov managed to get out of the burning tank and hide in the shed of the nearest house. After negotiations, both surrendered.
Why did you come?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
I came to Russia for trainings.
Why the Russia?
For trainings.
Do you know where you are now?
Yes.
Why did you come to Ukraine?
I didn't want to come here.
How did you get here?
I was sent for training.
What tasks did you have?
Just drive through Ukraine. There are no more tasks.
Follow the border? Why did you walk into the city?
I don't know.
Why did you bomb the city?
I don't know.
This young guy came out and he says that the chief suffered contusion. He can't hear anything. They look awful. Torn puffer boots, like homeless bums. Uniforms of any which kind. Torn, dirty, all black. The absurdity is, of course, that they stupidly threw their soldiers to slaughter the commander who was captured. I talked to him. I said, "What is the point of the attack? We were assigned. We're going until we die." "Well, okay. And the result? Here you have sent your soldiers. Well, they will send more."
Ukrainian projectiles also caught up with the second Russian tank that broke through to Chernihiv.
Their other vehicle, which wanted to break through further, I had the courage under the fences to shoot and hit another of their tanks, hoping not to damage anything on the people's house. But I didn't finish it. I just set it on fire.
Other Russian BMPs and tanks involved in the breakthrough are gathering in the parking lot near this new building. This video was taken by a surveillance camera, and it shows very clearly the moment when it dawns on the Russians that things are not going according to plan.
They lost the chain of command because there was a battalion commander in one tank. And after that, those who remained ran away. The first armored group that jumped out got lost and did not have a clear task. We took the charts of advancement from the commanders, straight from Google, and saw these first units did not have the task to enter the city. Their task was to blockade the city and ensure the advance of the main forces in the direction of Kyiv.
Another Russian BMP, which reached Chernihiv, is destroyed by the fighters in the Territorial Defense Unit.
That IFV was burned. It burned with all the crew and all the infantry that was there.
Attempted Russian offensive ends in failure. 7 Russian tanks and 7 BMPs with infantry are stopped by 4 of our tanks and up to 70 infantrymen. Dmytro Brzezinski calls this one of the key moments during the defense of Chernihiv.
From the side of Pivtsi, the epicenter, the situation there is difficult. There is an open area, wide, and there the enemy could deploy and move very calmly. And they had such an area there that they could advance and reach the city center. If they were to be established in any quarter, then in the future there would be very serious problems. It is very difficult to find an enemy in the city. We understood they are difficult for the enemy if they enter in columns, and in the future for the clearing operation, because the territorial defense units that were in the city were not really prepared for the urban warfare.
The result of the battle is that the defenders of Chernihiv get trophies. Russian troops abandon them while fleeing. T-72 is taken as a trophy by Artem Linkov. His unit of 3 tanks was simply sent here during the battle from Kuyinka. According to preliminary information, a tank battalion was supposed to enter Chernihiv at that time.
I received an order to advance to the epicenter and immediately attack the tank battalion. Tank battalion, that is, if all vehicles are in working order, 31 tanks. I only had 3 tanks, serviceable, working, all fine. Very unequal forces, 1 to 10. An order is an order. It must be obeyed. I think, oh well, maybe I'll survive. You know, men never ask for help. But when they do, they need it. Because that's all, the last cry of the soul. And when the officer from the north shouts, "Come on, run for the epicenter, because there is trouble there," I understand that if the colonel shouts trouble, then it is definitely trouble.
The Russian breakthrough was dealt with even without the reserves of Artem Linkov. Arriving at the end of the battle, he finds an abandoned Russian T-72 in a field near the road to Tovstolis. He records this whole process on video.
The first days of this aggression were so chaotic, everyone was scared. People, military, everyone was scared. And I posted this video to show that we too can fight. And we don't need to be afraid, no matter how many tanks arrive there, 100, 200, it doesn't matter. We can also fight well with 3 tanks.
Second video, already with a Russian armored personnel carrier as a trophy, Artem Linkov films for his father, who lives in Russia. His friends do not believe in the Russian invasion.
Hi, Dad. Here are the real Russian armed forces. In Chernihiv, Dad, you won't believe it. Behind the epicenter, behind the store, in the city. Can you imagine? There is a Russian tank, T-72. I've just moved it there.
The next day, February 27th, the Russians hit the positions of Ukrainian fighters near the epicenter with a missile.
I was wounded in the head. The gunner's leg was broken by the shockwave. Here is the crater. The guy is standing there. and I am standing in this crater. I was already lying on the ground, and I saw the tank crews began to get out. And that's when the artillery began its work. The 152 caliber was working, and the tank of the hero of Ukraine was hit right in front of my eyes. Alexei Senyuk, the tank commander. I already lifted my head. I saw the tank was on fire. He shouts, "I am burning!" Then the ammunition set detonated. He was thrown out of the tank, and that was it.
The epicenter area will be shelled continuously during the blockade of Chernihiv. On February 28th, Russian troops destroyed the hypermarket itself. The line of defense here ran right along the border of the residential area. The field behind the epicenter was already considered a gray zone.
These were already the outer positions. There was no one between this position and the enemy. Further out, it was already mined. There were trenches right along the creek in the birch grove. On March 14th, soldier Mikita Melnyk died there during shelling, a young guy. He was in the trench with his father. Father survived, son died.
Civilians died from the Russian shelling. On March 16th, not far from here, a projectile hit a queue of people waiting for bread. 14 people died. Buildings next to the contact line were also shot from tanks with direct fire.
This is building number 154. Here, we see how purposefully, with precision, they destroyed the stair riser from the tank. For a tank, a kilometer or 2 kilometers, it is very easy to aim and shoot.
A retiree, Alexander Chalish, lives in this house. We decided to tell his story because it is very revealing. The man is 70, and 4 years ago he suffered a stroke. Due to the ailments, he could not read and write. The man was rehabilitating himself by walking to Tofstolis. He walked here with his dog until, on February 26th, he saw a convoy of Russian tanks. Without hesitation, he picked up his own rifle and, together with the military, patrolled his own neighborhood for a month.
In the morning, it started at 6:30 and went on until 6 or 7 in the evening. After a stroke, all was behind me. But I felt the power. I felt that I was still needed for our native Ukraine. Here, boys, is the rifle that I walked with, and that protected both me and the city. 60 pieces, all loaded with buckshot and bullets. Well, we wanted to meet them. I shoot a hare on the first try. A Russian I would kill at once.
While Chernihiv was recovering from the first battles, Russian troops bypassed the city from the west, hoping to reach the highway to Kyiv. These plans were hindered by the blown-up bridge in Shestovytsya and also the village of Kuyinka, which is basically the western gates to Chernihiv, where the units of the armed forces were being concentrated.
If you actually look at what was here in this Kuyinka, it would be very difficult for them to pass here. The military had a lot of weapons. The military had the mindset such that if they were alive, no one would have passed through here. There were both grenade launchers and ambushes.
On February 28th, Kuyinka was fired at with 2 packages of cluster munitions. 3 policemen were killed and 16 more were injured. Positions in the forest outside the village, near the key Cloverleaf Road exchange, were occupied by the troops of the regional and district recruitment centers, both regular personnel and those called up for mobilization, such as Serhiy Vorobyov.
So that you understand, at that time in the whole military recruitment and mobilization office, there were only 1 to 2 officers and 2 shifts to guard the checkpoint, and there was a cat there. That is, the entire military recruitment center was dispersed to all of the positions.
Positions in this forest will be called Sparta.
Why 40 Spartans? Because living conditions were very difficult. It was so cold that you wake up from pain and realize the pain is just an uncontrollable shiver. During the first few nights, I thought I would not survive, but would simply freeze to death.
The main task of the Spartans was not to let the enemy convoys pass on this road. For this, we made roadblocks and prepared to meet the Russian armored vehicles.
We were given 4 RPGs for a certain number of launches. We have no armored vehicles, no helmets, no underbarrel grenade launchers, only assault rifles and RPGs, and also F1 hand grenades. About 2 for each of us. We didn't have HIMARSs, we didn't have javelins, but we had a very strong desire to defend the city. In total, we had about 5 fights here, but they were very short. Generally, when they sense there is resistance, they retreat. After they realized there was a barricade here and there was resistance, they began to bypass our position through the town of Mikhailo-Kotsubinsky.
Unable to pass these positions, the Russians began to raze them to the ground. Look at this forest. There is virtually no surviving tree.
They were sure we had an entire forest stationed with troops. The fact is that our tanks were working. What is it called there? War of maneuver. That is, they moved to shoot from here, to shoot from there. I think from their point of view, if there was a tank and there was a tank, they thought there was everything everywhere. This is where we had the first casualties. Here died Volodya, the captain. There was an air raid at night. A rocket or bomb hit a tree and 1 person was killed by shatters and 8 others wounded. There were a lot of battles with tanks, artillery, aircraft, and grads.
Look at this video. It shows just one of these strikes on positions in the forest, in which 2 soldiers were killed.
We received reinforcements of fighters, and we didn't even have time to meet them because they were killed within something like 2 to 3 hours. They were given the task of digging a trench here, and there was an air raid. The first explosion was somewhere near the road. What you had to do was lie down on the ground right where you were. And for some reason, they jumped up and ran towards the village. A second explosion, and they were killed.
Here, another fighter died from a sniper's bullet. Serhiy Vorobyov recalls that he had poor eyesight, and the only thing he asked to be delivered to his position were eyeglasses.
I contacted the volunteers. I say, "Can I have eyeglasses? The soldier has -4 there." They found a pair in Lviv and said they would be delivered. And one night, he was on duty with a thermal imager, and from that side, we think there was a pipe under the road. The enemy entered, and the sniper killed him. And in the morning, I called to say, "The eyeglasses are not needed anymore."
Having a huge advantage in heavy equipment, regardless of losses, the Russian troops continued to move to the south of Chernihiv, to the village of Shestovytsya. There they were regularly hit by the Ukrainian armed forces.
People were constantly calling and reporting that a convoy had passed here in such and such a direction. We passed all this information to the commanders, and they were hit there. As we were told then, only 30% of their convoy reached Shestovytsya.
From here to the village of Shestovytsya is 2 kilometers. Russians opened fire regularly. Our aviation engaged. Their aviation engaged. The intensity of the explosions was off the charts. At times, in just 15 minutes, 100 explosions could be heard.
Control over Shestovytsya and nearby villages was necessary for the Russians to establish a crossing over the Desna River.
On the 28th of February, they unexpectedly constructed a crossing over the Desna in just a few hours, in a spot where theoretically there should not have been a crossing. They planned out the spot, chopped down a part of the forest there, made a crossing, and even managed to bring over the recon and 1 BTG of equipment and personnel. The situation was saved by the fact that all of this was noticed in time, and with a direct hit of the Tochka-U missile, the crossing was torn to pieces and swept down the stream.
2 days before the events near Shestovytsya, the armed forces destroyed another Russian crossing in Makoshine near the town of Men.
The value of our artillery is in the destruction of the enemy. With just the first salvo of the Uragan MLRS, we hit and burned 10 tanks at once. Based on military science, any commander on that side should have rescinded the decision to continue, but they continued anyway, and there were a lot of tanks destroyed. I think no less than a battalion. The battalion is 30, but there they had more, somewhere up to 60 IFVs, tanks damaged and destroyed. They were drowning these tanks. They sank 3 tanks, and there they remained. It often resembled what would later be called Chornobaivka. At that time, the Chornobaivka battle had not happened yet, but the stupidity of the enemy always surprised us, because they move into this one position, they get hit, their tanks sink, yet they continue to move and move into that place, and we're basically destroying a warehouse.
Later on, the village of Shestovytsya would itself earn the glory of the Chernihiv's Chornobaivka. According to the Operational Command North, about 40% of the Russian troops and equipment entering the village were destroyed. These videos show the consequences of the work of the Ukrainian artillery on March the 7th. Russian equipment will also be destroyed at the local airfield.
Shestovytsya airfield, if you look at the map, is in the form of a ship. And this ship, it just magically attracted the enemy. They always drew their forces there, and we were destroying them there very diligently. Plus, the road that led them from the airfield to the crossing. The enemy, every day, several times, was mercilessly shelled, but even under fire, they moved across the crossing.
The crossing over the Desna River, which Alexander spoke about, was built by the Russians near the village of Shestovytsya in early March. This crossing did not sink under artillery fire.
Between the layers of this crossing, there is foam. And we saw that when there were direct hits at the crossing, there were holes, but the crossings did not sink and stood.
This crossing did help the Russians bypass Chernihiv from the south. On March 3rd, they occupied the villages of Zolotinka, Ladinka, and Yahidne. On this day, Major General Viktor Nikoluk arrived at the checkpoint near Yahidne. He decided to personally go out and scout the enemy positions.
The soldiers were not morally ready to go beyond the checkpoint. They didn't refuse, they just weren't ready. If we took them with us, we would simply suffer losses. There, they would have remained. 4 of us went to recon the objective. There was also a vehicle with the personnel of the 58th Brigade. They got through the ambush, and we were in the Tucson. And we really shut down several firing points. Then, unfortunately, Andrei Katkov was killed, the driver, but he also took part in the battle. One of our Special Forces troops was also wounded. They began to fire at us with mortars, AGS, then the APC-82 came out and simply unloaded on us with a 30 mic. We had to retreat. I had an AK-74, a grenade launcher, an RPG-22, and an RPG-26. I unloaded everything I had, but there were a lot of them. We left in the dark. Our infantry met us. We had to learn the word palyanitsya, because we wouldn't have gotten out without the palyanitsya. Then in the morning, I made a decision. We went and retrieved the body of Andrei Katkov. There was another battle. We did damage. Our scouts burned down the Tiger. Then we found out that there were about 6 people there whom we destroyed. We also destroyed another firing position with a grenade launcher. We took the body and got out on the recon IFV.
Russians knocked out Ukrainian infantry from a checkpoint near Yahidne. Reclaiming the checkpoint would take a fight. Viktor Nikoluk led the troops.
Russian checkpoint. It's done. Glory to Ukraine.
The commander took over the checkpoint.
In the army, all are equal, both generals and soldiers, and before sending a soldier to death, I must go there first. We held out for about 4 hours. Artillery and mortars began to work over us. 122, 152, then the Uragans, then the Grads, then the planes ironed us out. But we sat tight, and then a decision was made about the redeployment of equipment and the evacuation of personnel. This saved lives, because at night they launched a rocket bomb attack and almost nothing remained of the checkpoint.
On March 5th, the Russians advanced even closer to the southern outskirts of Chernihiv. They occupied the village of Ivanivka, located 13 kilometers from the city.
They cover-fired the village of Ivanivka with artillery while coming in from the other side. They entered from several sides. The 58th Brigade was fighting. Unfortunately, all our IFVs were destroyed. The enemy's equipment was destroyed, but about 2 companies got in, whereas what we had there were 5 IFVs and about 50 personnel.
To complete the encirclement of Chernihiv, the Russian troops had to take the last step. This last step would have to be the village of Kolychivka, basically the southern gates of Chernihiv. Control over the village would have allowed Russian troops to cut off any connection between Chernihiv and the Big Land. The road behind me leads to the automobile bridge over the Desna. At that time, it had not yet been destroyed. On the left, the road to Kolychivka. After the occupation of Ivanivka and Yahidne, the connection with Kyiv was maintained through this village. Completing the encirclement of Chernihiv would have allowed the Russian army to plan the attack on the city. The attack had to start from the southern direction as well.
We could assume this was going to happen sometime between March 10th and 15th. The city would have been divided into sectors, and each combat unit would be assigned a specific sector. The priority and direction of the attack on the main sectors would have been determined. The main sectors were the combined heat and power plant area and the silicate brick factory area. That is, from the south across the automobile bridge. Everyone expected the capture of these lines.
If they took Kolychivka, there would be no Chernihiv.
On March 7th, the Russian army first cover-fired at Kolychivka with their artillery, and then armored vehicles enter the village.
It was an enemy breakthrough. A mechanized company, a motorized rifle company, reinforced up to about 2 tank platoons, all took positions.
So, if we look at Kolychivka, the whole village was completely filled with military equipment. The first IFV stood at the beginning, and they stretched until the very end. I hit the last APC with the landing troops in it. That was closing the column. They advanced, fired to the right and to the left. Of the houses, only the foundations remained.
Rifle Battalion and the National Guard. A lot of them there were coming out of encirclement. Well, what do they have? Automatic weapons and RPGs. And there, they have tanks. Of course, they did not exactly flinch, but maneuvered. In the army, there are 3 types of maneuvers: envelopment, flanking, and withdrawal. We maneuvered.
Russian tanks reached the edge of Kolychivka.
Before the column entered, artillery and tanks worked us over, and they thought there were no more personnel left. They advanced in a column directly to Chernihiv.
They were met by tankmen of the 58th Brigade, units of the National Guard from Shostka, and a rifle battalion recruited from volunteers. At a critical moment, Viktor Nikolov arrived at the positions.
You know, without any illustrations, just as they portrayed in the movies. After me, not a step back. So you understand the general stands, the subordinate personnel too. Here are IFV explosions. There, the tank is on fire, and he's without a bulletproof vest and even without a helmet. He sets the task. You there, you here, I'm in the center. And they advance to recapture the position.
My grenade launcher was the first to meet the column. After the first shot, I was so lucky I hit the compartment where they had fuel. The tanky caught fire. Then the other shots were accurate. Over there was a tank. It was unloading on Chernihiv, and when it was unloading on Chernihiv from the side, I hit it in the side, in the engine compartment, and it caught fire. The ammunition set unloaded. The turret effing blew off, flew away together with the orcs.
All enemy tanks were destroyed. We captured 1 tank that broke through. The infantry moving in IFV was destroyed. The National Guard unit and the tank unit of the 58th Motorized Infantry Brigade played a major role because they destroyed the IFV with the unit inside it. We counted about 10 heads that remained, burnt.
This handsome boy is lying down.
We could see them very well. These were the Buryats.
Kipish was providing fire cover for his brothers in arms.
The assault rifle overheated, and he had to stop for a while to cool it down. I had 4 magazines and used about 8 or 9. We charged, we recharged.
In the end, I neutralized this APC with a direct shot from an RPG. It caught fire. The ammunition set detonated. And maybe those who remained alive retreated.
This junction on the way out of the village in the direction of Ivanivka was held by a group of the servicemen with the codename Jordan.
While the Afghanets was fighting with a tank and APC, the column was pulling up. We engaged them from around the corner, near the tile factory. And I was working from a position where the silo pit was. Their vehicles, ZIL or Ural, were moving. And I hit their armor with an RPG. It caught fire, and people began to retreat.
The recon guys of the 1st Tank Brigade captured the APC-82 from the Orks and drove back in it. APC drives out of the line of fire. We almost shot him. Thank God we didn't. Our scouts were there. We took this APC, and now it serves our 134th Guard Battalion. Separatists, IFV, Separatist tanks, all Separatists' armor is on fire. Thank God our guys have worked them over well. We hold on. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes. We are modest, but we can f them up.
They didn't even take their wounded. When they were retreating, their cries could be heard in the landings. They mostly tried to take away their equipment. When they finally came back, they were retrieving parts, because many were blown up. Our ARTA was doing its job there at that time.
Русский приветик.
Afghanets will be awarded the Order for Courage of the 3rd degree by the President of Ukraine for his actions in Kolychivka. Viktor Nikoluk will once again confirm his reputation as a general who personally leads his troops into attack.
Owing to him, Kolychivka stood firm. Extreme attack. When tanks, IFVs, were destroyed, and he led personnel that moved forward and recaptured the position in Kolychivka. This is the usual work of a commander, that is, as defined in the statute. The commander must be where it matters most. Accordingly, such a decision was made. Not only in Kolychivka, but all around our commanders are like that. Everyone wanted to fight, to destroy the enemy.
After the defeat in Kolychivka, the Russian army did not stop trying to surround Chernihiv and attacked Lukashivka, a village near the route to Kulikivka. It's important for controlling both the route itself and all the villages near Desna. On March 9th, the invaders, who had no less than 36 tanks alone, entered Lukashivka from 3 sides. The forces were too unequal. The Russians were being held up by 200 Ukrainians. They had 2 tanks and 4 lightly armored BRDMs. Under such conditions, the soldiers of the armed forces held their defense to the last, destroyed enemy armor as they withdrew, and figured out how to escape from Russian captivity.
To put it simply, they made a cauldron for us. We can neither get in nor out.
On March 9th, a unit of the 58th Brigade, led by Volodymyr Haidaichuk, held defensive positions at a farm in Lukashivka. For 3 days prior, it had been under constant fire from Russian troops.
On the 6th, Uragan and Grad missiles were incoming. Over here, to the village, near the cowshed, near the water tower, and where we had our tanks standing the first time, the missile just fell right under the wall and blew off half the head of the guy. He was lying on top of the tank, resting. Here, we had a KAMAZ truck. First, the tank fired at him. Then, IFV began to work it over, and it was set fire. There lies a projectile that flew in that time.
At 7 in the morning on March 9th, the Russians launched an assault. Their armored vehicles began entering the village.
In total, they had 34 to 38 tanks in the village. And for each tank, there were 2 IFVs. There was a lot. We didn't expect there would be so much. When they brought us here, they told us to stop the breakthrough, and there would be a maximum of 2 tanks here.
Volodymyr held the defense line at this stream. Seeing the first Russian tank, he managed to take a grenade launcher and shoot.
I crouched, raised the gun, stood up, fired a shot, sat back down, turned around, took a step, and saw a man from the 21st Battalion crawling. I told him, lie down, and then I got a sharp slap on the back.
A tank shell flew over the embankment. Volodymyr was wounded in the heel, arm, and lung.
I immediately screamed because I could neither breathe nor move. I could not feel my legs at that moment. I just ripped off the safety and lay there, clutching a grenade. I understood that if they started shooting at me and approached me by unclenching my hand, I would take several enemy people with me. Or they would simply kill me.
The grenade was taken from Volodymyr by his comrades, and the wounded comrade was carried to the chicken coop. A Russian tank shot at it 3 times with direct fire. Volodymyr miraculously survived again.
We were under the debris. Other tank men came and dug us out. They dragged me into the next room. The IFV and the tank began to shoot. Again, we were buried. They dug up again. Then they dug me up a 3rd time. Dragged me into the next room, then dragged me back to the trench. It was already dark by then. I no longer felt pain. Stuff would fall on me. I would lose consciousness again and feel nothing.
Volodymyr was given an injection, thanks to which he will be able to walk. The fighters are making their way to the neighboring village through the fields.
Halfway to the village of Budi, I realized I couldn't walk. I began to lean on the tankman. I held on to his bulletproof vest, and we walked side by side. We reached a bridge. I sat under a tree and immediately switched off. I could no longer stand up at all, and I couldn't breathe either. They took me in their arms, crossed their hands, and carried me to Budi, about 1.5 kilometers.
Another group of fighters, about 60 soldiers, withdrew from the farm earlier and took a different road, to the village of Baklanova Murivika.
There is shooting from there, explosion here, explosion there.
Moving out from the farm, the fighters noticed Russian equipment.
The road is there. This is how it goes. There was a convoy of 70 vehicles.
Alexander and his comrades shoot up to 5 trucks with ammunition. These pictures here they took right in the middle of the combat.
We began to hit the column with small arms, and the RPG was lying there. We brought a bag with shots. Volva, I'll it. Go ahead and it. Well, I stuck my head out of this ditch, shouted fire, and fired. Well, they showed me where to aim. They have a circle sign on the turret, so I fired at the circle. I understand under the turret there should be 2 of them and also a mechanic driver in the front. So 6,000 degrees of cumulative jet must have been fun. Well, the mech driver was still trying to get out, so we cut him down a bit there.
The Russians calculated the positions from which the Ukrainians were firing.
Our company officer was killed from this machine gun. He brought another bag of ammo. He was hit right under the helmet between the eyes.
Alexander and his comrades left Lukashivka through the fields.
And in the field, we were already at the distance where artillery could be used, so the artillery worked them over. We lost Lukashivka because soldiers of the 21st Battalion and 58th Brigade were not ready to fight against tanks. Into the village entered the Russian tanks, the IFVs. Of course, they threw up smokes, and a special unit entered in. So the 21st Battalion and 58th Brigade suffered losses. Part of them, from the 58th, were surrounded and captured.
Brothers Roman and Leonid Putusin died near one of these houses. They were Russian citizens who, in 2014, along with their father, immigrated to Ukraine and joined its defense.
They overtook an enemy armored personnel carrier, or IFV, I don't remember, and blew it up. Then, they retreated to the town and directed the artillery fire. The brothers fought to their last. Their armor was a mess of rags and plates. Broken plates. In each of their helmets, there were several bullet holes. When we found them, the boys were lying one with the other, as if they had hugged in their last seconds.
Viking has its own incredible story, which he told to journalist Yuri Butusov. In Lukashivka, together with other fighters, he was captured by the Russians, where they immediately began to torture him.
We were tortured by the enemy's battalion commander himself. He came out immediately and met us with a bat. He chose me because he thought I was from the Special Operation Forces. Looked closely at my tattoos. He took out a bat, hit me 5 times on the back, and was trying to learn something from me. For that, he received negative comments, addressed to him. We were loaded onto the MTLB armored vehicle. They were bringing us as a gift to the brigade commander. On the MTLB, we went along the road to Ivanivka. They had a brigade headquarters there.
On the way, the Russians got blown up on their own mines. Ukrainians took revenge on the enemy and fled to their side barefoot. Russians took away their shoes.
I fell off, but the guys caught me right away. There were 9 of us. The boys jumped. I was already hanging on the rope. My beard saved me, softened the suffocation. The guys found a piece of metal, cut off my rope, cut off everything I was wearing. The crew of this MTLB jumped out, opened the hatch. Brothers, help! We helped them and closed the hatch. We went into the field. We already heard that the chase for us began. 9 people, all wounded, waited for darkness to come out in 12 hours.
Dmytro Brzezinski calls the battle in Lukashivka one of the most heroic pages of Chernihiv defense.
In Lukashivka, the military personnel who were there understood tanks were coming, armored vehicles were coming. They stayed, and later they showed me photos of how they were fired on again and again. But they carried out their task. Although, what kind of preparation was there? Literally just a week. It was very impressive that the personnel did not leave their positions, realizing this could be the road to a certain end. Heroism, that is clear. Because yesterday's farmers, teachers, cooks, and everyone, when people found out just how much enemy armor we shredded here, yes, we also suffered losses. But, and this was the beginning of the war, the Russians were still trained military personnel, not the prison inmates they would use later.
For the battle in Lukashivka, Alexander Zelensky was awarded the Order for Courage of the 3rd degree by the President of Ukraine.
Well, you see, and people say the President's family members do not fight in the military. Just kidding. Not a relative, just the same last name.
The occupation of Lukashivka lasted 22 days. After the liberation, the bodies of killed Ukrainian soldiers and local residents were found in the village. From Lukashivka, the Russian military fired at the evacuation convoys that were breaking through from the blockaded Chernihiv. The fighters of the Ukrainian armed forces would not let the Russians move any further than Lukashivka.
Further up is the village of Baklanovo-Muravivka. We deployed the anti-tank guided missiles rehearsals, so any movement of the military equipment which was carried out here, destroying 1 or 2 units of equipment, and the enemy groups that tried to leave the village, we simply destroyed them.
In the next part, we will tell you about Russians' attempts to destroy Chernihiv, about the shelling of the city from aeroplanes and heavy artillery, and how our soldiers fought back, what military targets was at the Haharin Stadium and at the Ukraine Hotel, the battle of the skiing base and the battles for the mountain in Novoselivka. What was the price of the heroic defense of a strategic height, on which the Russian planes dropped more than 50 aerial bombs? Russian DRGs in the city, how many there were, and how they operated, attempts of the invaders to surround Chernihiv, why they failed, and the Russians were forced to flee. About all this in part 3.